thank some of our business premier sponsors, Boyman Berenshire, Emergency Contractor Services Incorporated, J.L. Schweeder's Building Supply Construction Incorporated, Mueller Memorial, New Studio Architecture, Schweeder's Pottery, the Pillars of White Bear Lake, and Excel Energy Foundation. And we encourage everyone to visit the White Bear Center for the Arts website for a complete list of all the people that support us. This activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Arts Board Operating Support Grant, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. This activity is also made possible in part by the Manitou Fund and by VLAWMO. We got a grant written by Alex Lagueros, development director, sitting in the back there. And we were so fortunate that we were able to work with Nick Voss. Do you want to come up here and talk to us? The whole theme that we've been working on as we open, as we reconnect, as we make art in community, one of the main themes that has been water. And we have Mayumi Amada's exhibition with water flows, life blooms, about recycling, about the past generations, and leaving things better for the future generations. We also have Sing Lee in the other room. He did an installation called Renew about kind of letting go of past energies and embracing the future. And he also talks about his forefathers. He lost his uncle who was a shaman, and just that kind of a loss of culture at that moment. So, and Mayumi ties that in too with her talking about her foremothers and leaving things cleaner for the next generation. We also had a series of teas starting this summer with Anna Metcalfe, who is also sponsored by VLAWMO, and her presentation is going to be this Friday, and we have a video with that. But we had 8 different teas with about 8 people for each tea, and then Anna Metcalfe made cups that started a conversation about water. So we collected all these stories, and there's going to be a video on Friday. And so we'd like to thank Nick for his part in making all of our dreams come true. Because I have to tell you, it is an incredible honor to have you here, Sharon. So here's Nick.
I'll just be available at the table after the event. So VLAWMO is the Bentons Lake Area Water Management Organization. And if you live in this area from White Bear Center for the Arts on westward, that water goes to East Vadnais Lake. And from here, it actually goes through a former wetland system that we now call Lambert Creek, which is also called County Ditch 14. So the upstream tea ceremonies, the stories we've been sharing have kind of been just a creative unfolding about the water in this place, the history of this water, how it's been treated, developed, worked around in the last 100 or so years, and what decisions we make about it today. And that's really where all the information comes in, where residents, businesses, organizations can be involved and help us manage and make wise decisions for the watershed. And that's why the table's out there, and don't be shy. There's some free materials and other ways to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Sharon Day. She's been an activist since the 80s. She was working with Indigenous peoples with the AIDS awareness and education, and she continues to this day as a writer, an artist, and she leads the Nibi Walks, as well as being the executive director of the Indigenous Peoples Taskforce.
Bonjour, Midewin, Maganidug, Nagamamayangin and Dishnakas, Wabashe Shandodam, Ojibwe Koyandao, Dishnijo Madeo, Madewanakoyandao. So in my language, I said, greetings, my relatives. My name is Singing Wolf, although most people know me by my English name of Sharon Day. And I'm from the Boys Fort Reservation, which is, if you drive straight north, should take a left about 60 miles before you get to International Falls, and you'll run into Net Lake, because there's only one road that goes in, and that's it. There's no other way to get in or get out. I also told you that I'm second degree Midewin, and Midewin is, in English, it translates into the Grand Medicine Society. And I like to tell people that, to be Midewin means studying, I think I went to ceremonies for about 18 years before I offered my asema and asked the grandmothers of the lodge, in this way down, we Midewin. And the grandmothers say, okay, you can come in and you can study, and at the end of a year, you stand at that doorway again, and again say, Niswing Dan, we Midewin. And they either tell you, Baka, wait, or come in. And so I did that the first time in 1998, after 18 years of going to ceremonies, and I would say it's, some of us are a little shy of commitment, and once you're become a Midewin, you're Midewin for life. And when they call you, you must come. And then I did it the second time in 2008. And at this point, I have no intention of putting myself through that again. It's not that it's difficult, but whenever you're moving in some direction, it never fails that there's some obstacles that it's almost as though there's this negative energy trying to pull you another way, and anyhow, I also said that I'm Midewin, which is at some point, I don't know how many years ago, but the lodge lifted up 7 women, and they said, you are now have more responsibility to take care of the water and to teach people about the water. So in God's Ichigate, Nibi Onche, what that means is I will do it for the water. And these Nibi walks really came out of Ojibwe ceremonies, the Midewin Lodge. And since the beginning of time, women have taken care of the water. And not only among Ojibwe culture, but when you look around the world and you see images of somebody gathering the water at the beginning of the day, those images are always women, almost always women. And so we are the ones, I think, in every culture who gather the water. And part of that is because, to this point in our evolution, we women are the only creatures that can bring another human being into the world. And so we are the life givers, and water is life-giving. So those Nibi walks, they originated in the Midewin Lodge, Three Fires Society, and they, as I said, we have songs that are so ancient, water songs, and it's women who gather the water, make the offerings for the water, sing those water songs, and make those petitions for the water to be sacred. And men have their responsibilities, and that is to take care of the fire. So if you look at this lodge here, and it was divided evenly in half, women would sit on one half and men would sit on the other half. And we share equally in the responsibilities of the health of our people, of giving life, of taking care of that life. And and that has the way it's always been. And then in 1998, there were some things that were happening, more and more concern about the water. And you probably know this, but here in Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes, 45% of our water is impaired. 45% of our water is impaired. And when you look around the rest of the country, they don't fare any better, sometimes worse. And in 2008, around that time, we Minnesotans, during recession, we taxed ourselves because we knew that our water was impaired. And so we taxed ourselves to clean up our water, and also taxed ourselves to create beautiful arts centers like this one across the state. So those were the two things that there was a referendum, and the majority of Minnesotans said, yes, we want to clean up our waters, and we want to take care of our art and our culture. And so in the lodge, we also were very concerned. And in 1998, the chief of the lodge, he said to all of us, what will you do for the water? And there was some Dakota people who were trying to save Camp Coldwater Spring in Minneapolis. And maybe some of you remember about Save Camp Coldwater. Was something about Highway 55, but I can't remember what that slogan was.
Stop the reroute.
Stop the reroute, yes. And there was there was a number of people who gathered one day, and it was a snow, and its caption was something like that. Me and my grandson, we were in the exclamation point at the end. But the chief said, you Midewin, go over there and help those Dakota people. And so for me, that was the beginning of about a 2.5 year involvement. I lived across the river from the spring, and so I could often hear at night when the helicopters would come, and I would jump in my car and go over to see what was happening. There were many hearings. The road got built, and the spring still flows. We did get a law passed that said Camp Coldwater Spring was a cultural site, and that whatever they did, it couldn't diminish the flow of the spring, but it has diminished the flow of the spring. And that water comes up into the earth through limestone. And so when they were doing that, I went over there one Sunday morning, and I got some of that limestone, and I put it around my garden. And my grandchildren were little then, 4 or 5 years old. And they used to walk on that limestone. It was on the garden. And after a few years, all there was pebbles. And that's because limestone, is very fragile. And so you can think about all those trucks, 24 hours a day, going on that highway, what it's doing underneath. But the spring still flows, and I believe it still flows because people continue to go there and make their offerings and speak to those water spirits. So this is where I'm from, this island, this beautiful island called Spirit Island on that lake. And I just want to give you this image of where I'm from. When we were kids, we would go out to the island, and we'd paddle canoes out there, and we'd play on the island all day. But as soon as the sun began to set, we'd jump in our canoes and head home. And you just got this feeling. And my older cousins would say, I asked them, why don't we stay there at night? And she said, the only people who stay on Spirit Island at night are the people who want to see their forefathers. And that was good enough for me. So when the chief said, "What will you do for the water?" You know, what he said was, what would happen if all of the women of the world stood up and said no more? No more to the municipalities, the power companies, the oil companies, you know, everybody that is the farmers that are polluting our water. What would happen if all of the women of the world stood up and said no more? And in this picture, you can see my niece, my sister, myself, and Josephine Mandamin. And Josephine was, so as I told you, I'm second degree Midewin. I'm kind of, you know, on the low end of the degrees. And Josephine was fourth degree Midewin. And she was not only a Midewin, but she was a sun dancer, and she was a moon dancer, and she was a remarkable woman. And Josephine heard the chief say that same thing. What will you do for the water? And one day she ran into this gentleman, and she had already cleaned out all of the toxic cleaning chemicals from her house and preserved and conserved all the water and in her home and with her family. But she ran into this old man, and he said to her, "Bonjour," and she said, "Bonjour," and he said, I saw you walking along the lake," and she said, "Oh," you know, "Oh," and he said, "It was you and your sisters. You had long skirts on, and you were carrying a pail, and you were walking along the lake." And she thought about that for a minute, and she thought, I can do that. Water has to move to be healthy, and I can symbolically carry that water around Lake Superior. And so she came to the lodge, and she said what she wanted to do, and we all agreed, you know, that was a wonderful thing to do. And so that was 2003. So 1998, we began with Camp Coldwater. 2003 was the first water walk around Lake Superior. And that was the first time that I know of where we have taken our ceremonies outside of our lodge and into a geopolitical situation. And we did that because 45% of our water is impaired. And so this picture of the four of us is at Gulfport, Mississippi. And after Josephine walked around Lake Superior and the rest of the Great Lakes, then there was another young woman who had a dream. And you know, to us, our dreams are more important than our waking thoughts. Because in our waking thoughts, you know, we can ponder this, ponder that, you know, should I do this, should I do that? Oh, that's not realistic. But in our dreams, it's like a deep, deep meditation. Your mind goes where it wants to go. And as a woman who taught me meditation when I was about 24 years old, she said, the mind always moves to an area of greater charm. And so we believe our dreams. We make life decisions based on our dreams. Anyhow, this young woman had a dream of, she said, I could see women carrying the water from the 4 oceans. And so Josephine came back to the lodge and she said, what do you think? And we talked about it a little bit, and of course we agreed that we should do that. Bring that healing salt water from the 4 oceans to the heart of Turtle Island, Lake Superior. And so I really wanted to bring the water from the West Coast because I have family in Washington, and it's such a beautiful, right, up over the mountains. And anyhow, but somebody who lived out there, you know, took that. And I thought, well, the East Coast isn't too bad. And somebody took that. And Josephine said, and I'll do Hudson Bay. She was Canadian, right? And all that was left was the South. Gulfport, Mississippi. You ever been there? Beautiful place. When you head north, directly north, following these old trade routes, Highway 61, coming up through St. Louis, Cahokia, there ain't any Indians there. No Indians. Because they moved everybody west of the Mississippi, right? So you got the Choctaw Indians down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and that's it. No Indians in Tennessee, except for the ones who hid out. Arkansas, Missouri, not until you get to Wisconsin. But nobody volunteered for the South, and Josephine said, who's with me? And so I said, I'll do it. And I'd actually been there the year before, so I knew a little bit about it. So, so that picture is at Gulfport, Mississippi. And we carried them with the water north. And this next picture is when all four of the walks on the Mother Earth Water Walk, when we all met at Lake Superior, we're in these boats out on the lake. We brought all the water from those four oceans. We commingled it in one big copper pail, and then we got in boats and we went out about a mile out into Lake Superior. And these are all people who are standing on a bluff at watching us go. And we're singing and they're singing. And it was the most beautiful, Lake Superior was like shimmering. It was so beautiful. And we could see clear to the bottom, and at the bottom you could see sturgeon tracks. And Josephine was wondering, where should we put this water? And just about then, this eagle flew past us, and then he made a turn, and he went back, and she said, that's the place. And it was so beautiful. So that was the first walk that I led, and then since then I've led probably 20 more. 2 years after that, 2013, we walked the Mississippi River, and we started at Lake Itasca on March 1st. And we were walking into Grand Rapids around March 4th, and there was this huge blizzard. As we walked into the Grand Rapids, there was wind was just blowing in our face. And so I texted Josephine that night, and I said, that north wind is very brutal. Could you petition Giwade and Nodin to be a little gentler to us? And she said, I'll get right on it. And this is the next day. We're walking south on 169, and it was the most beautiful day. The wind was at our back, and there were hardly any cars. Every once in a while, I'd see a plow truck, but otherwise there was nobody on the roads, and it was one of the most beautiful days walking. We have youth in our program, and they drove all the way down to Mississippi and to walk with us for 2 days. And then on their trip back, they stopped at Memphis to see Martin Luther King, to see the motel and where he was shot, and very meaningful to them. And this is at Cahokia Mound, Monk's Mound there, and we had a ceremony on top of that. It's about 100 feet up. And back in the day when Cahokia was inhabited by Indigenous people, it was larger than Paris at the same point in time. It was a beautiful trading site, and so we traded with people from Mexico, Florida, the north, all over. And sometimes people wonder how could that be. But I can tell you, having walked across the United States from the south to the north and the north to the south, and from as far west as Montana to St. Louis, and I can tell you it's very, very possible. After the Mississippi River, I thought, okay, that's enough. Who else has walked from the south to the north and the north to the south? And after we walked the Mississippi River, one of the women who walked with me on the Mississippi said, well, what about the Ohio? The Ohio River is the biggest polluter of the Mississippi. And I said, yeah, well, what about Ohio? Like, maybe somebody else should do that. And she came to see me a couple weeks after we got back, and something happened. And when she came to see me a couple weeks after we finished the Mississippi River, and she brought me a gift, and I opened it up, and it was an eagle head. And there was when we started to do that first walk, I went to see the grandmothers, and I had 2 pieces of wood, I do a little art, and there was 2 pieces of wood in my garage, and one was very light, and the other one was a little heavier, but they were both beautiful. And I took it over to the grandmothers, and I said, well, which one should we use? And they picked the light one, and then they gave me 4 eagle feathers, and some other sacred items to put on that staff. And then I carved the Mississippi River on the staff. And so when Barb brought me that eagle head, she said, this is for the staff. And first I cried, because there's no greater honor than to get an eagle feather. But to get an eagle head is, that's so special. So I cried, and then I swore at her. And I said, okay, we'll do the Ohio. And after the Ohio, I kind of gave up. Sometimes I think, even with Josephine, people think that, when somebody does something extraordinary, that, we had some kind of clear vision or some epiphany, or, well, no. Some of us kind of go kicking our heels and in the sand, and like, no, I don't want to do that. No, that's too hard. And but then we do it, and so ordinary people, we can do extraordinary things. This is just an image from on the Ohio. On the Ohio River, there are nuclear-fired plants and coal-fired plants. And sometimes you're walking along the river, and there'll be a berm that goes up about 12 feet, and it might be a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile long. That berm is a holding tank for all of the water that has been used to cool the plant. And so in that water, like you never, arsenic, heavy metals, it's just poisonous stuff. And today, if we decided to empty every holding tank that's holding those fluids, it would take us 100 years to do that. And where would we put it? That's what we saw. And when we came back from the Ohio River, I was hearing these things about polymet. I'm from the Iron Range, just north of the Iron Range, but I grew up mostly in Cook in Virginia, and I kept hearing about this polymet, and so I decided, we need to walk the St. Louis River, and so we did, and to this day, polymet still is not, operational, so to keep up those prayers. and this is just the St. Louis River, the Jay Cook State Park. And the tribal chair at the time, her name was Karen Diver, and she was one of Obama's environmental, she was on one of his presidential panels anyhow. And so she said, well, where are you going to end the St. Louis Walk? And I said, well, down there where it's gonna meet Lake Superior. She said, I would like you to end it at Spirit Island. So this is another Spirit Island. And this is in Spirit Lake, and where the river, St. Louis, becomes very wide. And when Karen was a tribal chair, she bought back Spirit Island. And people on her reservation, some of them were not happy. They said, why would you buy an island that is so polluted? So that island is a, what do you call them when the land is so Superfund site? They said, why would you buy an island that's a Superfund site? And she said that island was an important place on our migration. Because originally, this was all Dakota land. All of Minnesota was Dakota land. And we came from the East Coast. They say that the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa, we were called people of the Three Fires. And if you went from the St. Louis River, not St. Louis, St. Lawrence River, and you look southward, like our people would stretch all the way to the Carolinas. And so, we lived in an area that was, lush, right? You had all that fishing, berries, everything. But then 500, 600 years ago, there were prophets that came to the people and they said, go west until you come to a place where food grows on the water. And of course that food is wild rice, monoman. And so that's what we did, and that migration took, they say, 500 years. And everything that they told us that was going to happen has happened to us. We lost our language, our spiritual ways, our children were taken away, we lost our land. But the same thing has happened to you. All of you that are immigrants to this country. Do you know the language that your ancestors spoke? Do you still practice the same spiritual ways, have the same traditions? I don't think so. And that's saying, I grew up in Cook, Minnesota, where everyone's name was Swanson, Olson, Johansson. And there were no white people. There were Swedes, there were Polish people, there were Finns, and their grandparents spoke the language. And they still cooked, their traditional foods. But to find a good pasty today, that's pretty darn hard, right? So anyhow, I digress. But Spirit Island was an important place on our migration. So after this thing, I'm not covering every river I've ever walked, but I'm trying to give you a little bit of the history of it. When we walked the Ohio River, there was a woman her name is Diane Stevenson. She's an Ojibwe woman married to a Meherrin man in Virginia, and she came to walk with us. And she stayed with us for 2 weeks, and then she took the bus over the mountains to Hampton, where she lived. And on her way home, this happened. There was an oil train that came off the tracks and it was burning in Lynchburg, Virginia. And she called me and she was crying and she said, Sharon, we have to walk the James River because that's where that oil spill went. And so the next year, we did walk the James River. And it was one of the most beautiful walks. We started in Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's a blue ways. The rivers, they call it a blue ways. I think it's sort of like St. Croix, it's protected. And then we walked down and you know, I always thought that, you know, as an Indigenous person, I knew what colonization meant. But I had no idea until I was in Virginia. And to walk through Lynchburg and, you know, there's a reason they call it Lynchburg. To walk into Richmond, you know, and to be at the spot where when they stole the people from Africa and they brought them here and they brought them up the James River, Richmond was the first place that they were auctioned off. And to be there and, you know, and to see the signs on the highway that, you know, talk about this plantation and that plantation, and I can't remember his name now, but the guy who, he couldn't wait for the Queen to get more land, and so he formed his own little army and wiped out 4 tribes. And then the Queen sent, you know, her army, and they quartered him, you know, and but you know, they have signs on the road that say that Virginia, the land of love. There's a good friend of mine, Perfay. She's a singer-songwriter, and she was walking there. And when we got to the end of the James River at Chesapeake Bay, we did our closing ceremony, and I could hear some noise. We had turned, and we were just starting to walk back to our car in the parking lot, and I could hear this noise. And I looked, and there were these dolphins came, and they came to greet us. And then we walked the Potomac, and the beautiful river. I think the thing I was going to say about the Potomac was, you know, it was during the 2016 election, and we kind of knew Trump was going to win because, you know, that's all we saw, all the signs. It was, but here there was a mountain pass, and it was too dangerous for us to walk, and so there was an environmental group, anyhow. So they conferred amongst each other, and they said, we're going to take Sharon downstream with the water in the canoe, and you all can drive over, and then they met us on the other side. And so those are some just beautiful memories, and just, you know, gorgeous. And you know, after we walked the Ohio River, we thought a lot about the Missouri, and then Faith spotted eagle. There was a march in St. Paul, and she came up to me and she said, I want you to come and walk the Missouri River between through the Standing Rock Reservation. And so I told her, well, we don't really walk a portion of a river. We start at the headwaters, and then we go to the confluence or the mouth of the river, which, by the way, in our language is Zagtoon, which means the place where all comes to be nourished. And sadly today, most of the mouths of the river are in dead zones, and but that was our original name for the mouth of the river. Anyhow, so I said, well, we always start at the headwaters. She said, well, then okay, when can you do it? And I said, well, give me a year to raise some money, and so we did. And of course, the year before was Standing Rock, the encampment at Standing Rock, and so I had gone there a couple of times, and so you know, it was a young woman carrying water on the horse. This is, we're standing on the Nebraska side at pretty much daybreak, and we're on the Nebraska side of the Missouri, and on the other side is Iowa, and there were some state troopers that kind of kicked us out of the Missouri, so we had to go over to the Iowa side. This was, every person in this picture had been at Standing Rock when it was filled with people. And so when we walk through there now, it's just returned to like cow pasture, right? And so as we approach this river, usually just one person carries the water at a time and one person carries the staff. But it just pulled all of us, and we all just emerged on this bridge. we're actually crossing Cannonball River. And the last LaDonna Bray Boulillard, she was the founder. It was on her land that the Sacred Stones camp was on, and she passed this year. But this, we were just singing and walking, and it was so special to all of us. This grandma Hazel, she was about 97 years old. She passed too. But when she carried that water, it was so uplifting to us. To see somebody come out and take those steps, carrying the water. And so I made a little video when she was walking, and I put it on Facebook. And the next day, there was a note on our RV when we went back, and it said, "Thank you so much. I went looking for you, but I couldn't find you." But that video went viral, and she had lived in Milwaukee for a lot of her life. She'd lived all over, really. But she said a reporter had called her from Milwaukee, and she did an interview, and it was so sweet. Wisconsin River, and just beautiful headwaters, comes out of Lac Vieux Desert. And this is important, where that river is. It was like the beginning of the trade route south. You take the Wisconsin to the Mississippi, then go down, or you could go walk to the left and you'll end up at Lake Superior, and if you walk to the right, you end up at Lake Michigan. And the tribe there is now clearing those trails. And we walked the Red River of the North before COVID, and that staff that we carried there, we carried 134 names of Native women who've been pulled out of the Red River. We had names of 134, and then there were 4 that were never identified, and this was since 1976. So in, I don't know how many years that is, but 50 years, 134, 138 Native women pulled out of the river. And, they didn't, when I was searching for the newscast, many times there would be a little brief news blurb that would say, 2 young boys were fishing, and they came across a body that had floated out of the river. Or there were 2 men that were fishing, and they came across a dead woman. Like the story was more about the young boys or the fishing men than the woman herself. When we crossed the border into Canada, the Canadians were really nice to us, and they asked about the staff, and so we told them. And one of the Canadians said, so I imagine most of those women were found on the US side, right? Because the United States were so violent. And I said, actually, 90% of them were found on the Canadian side. And on the Canadian side, the Red River is only about 90 miles long. It goes through Winnipeg and then up into Lake Winnipeg. And, and it's hard to reconcile that, right? That these people are so nice to us, treated us so well. But they're the same people who are creating, growing, socializing humans who can kill Native women and dump them in the river. And that is really difficult to reconcile. So at the Forks in Winnipeg, they had a monument. We had a Midewin ceremony there, and we painted the names of all the women on little white stones, and we put them at the base of that white marble monument there. So I always tell people who walk with me, you know, we have to, we create a community when we walk, and everybody has a job, everybody walks, you know, some farther, some shorter. Most people walk about a mile, and if you're not walking, you're driving the follow car, or you're looking up ahead to see where we're gonna be that night, where we're gonna eat, talking to reporters. There's so many things to do if you're not walking. You're just like busy all the time. I had a friend who came and she said, well, I have to take this conference call. And she tried to do that twice. And for the next 30 days, she hung it up. But so you're so busy doing these things. And after we walked the Mississippi River, when I came home, that was 63 days. And when I came home, I would wake up in the morning, and the first thought would be, oh my God, I'm late. I had to make sure the other walkers are up. Oh my God, like, you know, and I would realize, like, you know, I was home in my own bed. And but I lived for about 30 years in Highland Park in St. Paul, and about a block from Hidden Falls, and right below you know, the Hidden Falls Regional Park. And you know, I miss the people that I walked with so much. I decided that every Sunday we're going to go to church, and wherever we are in this country, we're going to meet at the river. You know, if they were in New York, they'd be at the Hudson. You know, Barb would be around Lake Wisconsin. And people were up at Grand Rapids. People were at St. Louis, Baton Rouge, and Memphis. And 9 o'clock we would gather at the river, at the water or lake, wherever we were, and we would have a water ceremony. And that continues today. I don't always make it to Hidden Falls every Sunday, but there are people there every Sunday making those prayers to the water. And at the end of every day, we make a circle on the ground. So when we get up in the morning, we walk one by one by one by one, taking turns until the end of the day. And at the end of the day, we make a prayer circle on the ground. And we all offer our sema, and we ask for permission to rest. And when we put that tobacco down, we say, Gijadike sema, wait right here, I'll be back. And Josephine used to say that, well, it means more than that. It means, wait right here, don't get in any trouble. And then that's the exact point where we begin the next day. So it's a walking meditation, it's a prayer, every step is a prayer. I ask people to be silent when they walk. And that's really hard for people. But you know, if you're walking a mile, you walk at 15, 20 minutes. That's not very long to be silent. But that seems to be one of the hardest things for people to do. Because if we're talking, just like I'm talking now, like, you know, I'm looking at you, I'm wondering what you're thinking, but, you know, but I'm hearing myself, right? But when you're walking and you're silent, you know, you can hear the wind, you can hear the birds, you can hear that hawk flying overhead, calling to you, you can hear the horses calling, you know, and sometimes if you're lucky, you know, you get a message, you know, you get a song or a piece of poetry, you know, some words to share with other humans about what it is that you're experiencing. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful way to honor the water. And I always say, you know, but the walk is just the beginning. You know, when you get back home, what are you going to do tomorrow? What are you going to do for the next day and the next day for the water? Because without water, we will all perish. And we're at a critical point in our history as human beings right now. If we wish to leave a planet that is habitable for the next 7 generations, even the next 3 generations, we've got to do something. And, we walked line 3 this summer, and, I believed when we walked that, that oil would never flow through that pipeline. And maybe I have too much faith in the president and the governor. So far, they haven't come through, but there's still hope, because that wild rice, monomen, that is the most sacred food to us, and the pipelines, polymet, they'll continue to destroy the rice. There used to be wild rice in Minnesota, all the way down to the backwaters of Mississippi, and you have to go pretty far north now to find wild rice. But I'll end here and be happy to take any questions. We have a website. I don't know if I put it on the PowerPoint, but it's nibiwalk.org, and it has a lot of information and videos and so on. Go ahead. Yes.
Sharon, when you're carrying the water, are you collecting water at the headwaters?
Yes.
And then carrying it down to the mouth?
Yes. Yeah, we always make sure that we gather enough to, if we're following a river, like it's not so important, but when we walked to Mississippi, we wanted to gather enough because we could drink it then, to have for ceremonies, and there would be evaporation and all that kind of stuff. So, we gathered about a 5-gallon pail and maybe another 2-gallon. Maybe we had 7 gallons, and that lasted us all the way. And so far, we've never spilled the water. Yes.
When is your next walk?
North Carolina, we're going to walk the Haw River, and that merges in with the Cape Fear, and that will be October 24th, about maybe an 8-day walk.
And do you put on your website where you're meeting and all that, or?
Yeah, mostly. I think we start at a place called Oak Ridge, just north of Wilmington, and down there. Yes.
You were talking about getting a message sometimes, and I wondered if a person in your group, for instance, or if you yourself, if you get a message, what is the practice that you have around that message? Do you share that? Do you keep it in a way to yourself? Or, is it considered something that you want to share? Or, I don't want to say the word should, but what's the best practice for that you feel?
Yeah, I'll just share. This is something that sometimes I write, and some of those messages, and then sometimes I forget that I write something, and then I find it later, and I that's pretty nice. This is water is life, water is joy, water is peace, water is justice, water is powerful. Which do we seek? The river does sing, the winds do howl. The sun spreads its warmth from east to the west. As the Mishomis moves across the sky, the newborn opens her eyes to gaze inquisitively at the world. The river sings to me, and she sings to you. The 4 winds pull us in a circle dance of love. Ever the conniver and collaborator, dancing and cavorting with the enemy. And the river sings. The lakes mirror all that there is. Love, fear, war, peace. Which do we choose? Only at night.
Can you set it up ahead of time? Or?
Sometimes we're invited. You know, a church or a community center knows we're coming. There are press releases that go out and people invite us. There's I think it's Vermont Public Radio. She's interviewed us a lot, and we kind of have inside jokes. You know, communities tell us their stories, and we carry those stories downstream with us. So it really is kind of an exchange. You know, and usually at the end of the day, like, we're tired. We walk 30 miles, sometimes 40 miles, and so really all we want to do is eat and sleep. But when people invite us, we go, and many times they feed us, and so that's worth staying awake for. But we love it because then we can carry their stories with us. The more we learn about a river, you know, there's usually an orientation at the beginning of every walk, and we'll have you know, somebody come and tell the history, you know, an Indigenous person talk about the history of the river, maybe a scientist talk about, you know, what's happening with that river right now, what are the impacts. And so we've learned so much. Like, we know that in the Minnesota River Valley, they're the oldest rocks on Earth in that valley. And we know that it was caused by this huge and glacier. There's a lake way up Canada, and it opened up, and all that glacial water came down and formed the Minnesota River Valley. So we learned so much as well from our hosts, and you know, when I walk the Mississippi, I have a relationship with this river. You know, I've lived, crossed it, crisscrossed it almost every day. I love that water, love that river. And so when I walked the Ohio, I thought, am I gonna have that same feeling? Will I feel anything for the Ohio River? And we had just gotten out of Pittsburgh, and we were out, you know, kind of maybe 100 miles, 200 miles down the way, and I had to walk across a bridge. And it was like an open graded bridge, so you could see the water underneath. And I tell you, you could feel, you know, just that energy coming up from that river. It was quite remarkable. And you know, all these rivers are connected. You know, they're all the tributaries of the Mississippi. You know, and if you look at it as being like the main artery of Turtle Island. You know, this is lifeblood. So it doesn't matter what the river is. There's something about wanting to get to that next bend and see what's around the corner. Okay, one more.
Those words you shared kind of reminded me about this choice that you have, maybe even when you're looking at water locally around here. When you're attuned to the harms and the histories, sometimes that can be this constant reminder that's being fed back at you, because it's possible to just pay attention to, like, well, this is wrong, or it's impaired, and that kind of thing. Do you have like advice, personal experience with how to shift that focus? Because yes, we do see all these harms, and at the same time we have these deeper experiences that are possible. And
all I can say is that, you know, like, if we need to, all of us, we all need to reconnect, you know, to the land, to the water. And when we can do that, we won't have to tell people. They'll know that themselves and hopefully make different decisions. I want to introduce Mary. Mary's walked with me a number of times, I don't know how many times, but she shows up. Is it the Potomac?
Yep.
Yeah.
Minnesota, Potomac, Wisconsin, and Willow.
Okay, yeah. Yes, thank you so much, Mary.
When you say that every step is a prayer, is that prayer verbal,
intention. You know, I ask people when we're walking in the Missouri River, and we're in Montana, and we were coming up to an area where 300 acres had been, the grasslands had been burned. And it was so dry, and the land was so parched, and, you know, just told the walkers, you know, like today, you know, put your intention to, you know, praying for rain. And, you know, it was funny because that day, you know, a car pulled up and this woman said, I've driven by you several times, and I know you don't need my help, but will you please pray for rain? Well, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for making it possible.